The human security officer had been standing in the same position for 43 minutes and had reached an important conclusion. Royal ceremonies were dangerous, not because of assassins, because of boredom. He kept his posture straight, eyes forward, hands behind his back, doing his best impression of someone who absolutely belonged inside a palace that floated above a ringed planet and was guarded by technology he didn't fully understand. Behind him, one of the other guards whispered quietly through the comm channel. "Still alive?" "Barely," he replied. "Don't fall asleep. I'm standing next to a queen. If I fall asleep, that's natural selection." The palace around them hummed softly with controlled energy. Walls shifted subtly, responding to invisible commands. Defense systems ran silent checks in layers so complex that even thinking about them felt like homework. At the center of it all stood the throne platform, and on it, the queen. She did not move much. She didn't need to. Everything about her presence suggested control so complete that movement would have been unnecessary decoration. Her luminous skin reflected the ambient light in soft waves, and the delicate, glass-like filaments flowing behind her shifted slowly, as if responding to something deeper than air currents. The officer focused on his breathing. "Remember," he muttered under his breath, "observe, don't interfere, and definitely don't cause an interstellar incident." A nearby alien guard glanced sideways. "You speak to yourself often. It helps me maintain professionalism." "That suggests your professionalism requires support. Constant support." The ceremony continued. Advisors presented reports. Generals discussed fleet positioning. Someone somewhere gave a speech that lasted long enough for the officer to consider new career paths. Then something changed. At first it was subtle. A slight flicker in the ambient field, a shift in the air pressure. The officer frowned. "That's new. What is?" The guard beside him asked. "I don't know yet." He scanned the chamber more carefully now, eyes moving across the walls, the pillars, the ceiling structures. There. A distortion, small, wrong, something that didn't belong. The officer's body reacted before his mind fully understood. His hand moved toward his sidearm. Too late. The weapon appeared in the middle of the chamber like a tear in space. No warning, no sound. Just a sudden presence that should not have been possible. It was small, compact, elegant, and pointed directly at the queen. The officer did not think, he moved. "DOWN," he shouted, already stepping forward. The world seemed to slow. Guards reacted a fraction too late. Defense systems struggled to identify the threat. The weapon fired. The energy discharge cut through the air with unnatural precision, a thin beam of something that didn't behave like light or plasma or anything the officer recognized. He stepped into it. There was impact, but not the kind he expected. No explosion, no burning. Instead, it felt like reality itself had reached into him and rearranged something. His body locked, his vision fractured. The last thing he saw was the queen standing behind him, her eyes fixed on him with a focus so intense it felt like gravity. For a moment, just a moment, her calm expression broke. Not fear, recognition. Then everything went dark. The chamber erupted into chaos. Guards activated shields. Alarms screamed through the palace. Advisors shouted orders that overlapped and collided with each other. But at the center of it all, the queen did not move immediately. She stepped forward slowly, looking down at the human officer lying motionless at her feet. The strange weapon had already vanished, as if it had never been there. The queen lowered herself beside him. The room around her continued to panic. But her focus remained entirely on the human who had taken the strike meant for her. For the first time in a very long time, the palace's perfect order had been broken, and something far more dangerous had just begun. The first thing the officer noticed when he woke up was that he was not dead. The second thing he noticed was that something was breathing very close to him. He kept his eyes closed for a moment. This, he decided, was a strategic decision. If something terrifying was nearby, delaying eye contact felt reasonable. He tested his ability to move. Bad idea. Everything hurt. Good, he whispered quietly. Pain means I'm alive, or at least very convincingly alive. The breathing near him shifted slightly. That felt less good. He slowly opened one eye, then immediately opened the other. Oh, he said. The alien queen was curled beside him, not standing, not surrounded by guards, curled. Her body was positioned close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. One of her luminous filaments rested lightly across his arm, almost like it had been placed there intentionally. He stared at it. Okay, he said softly, either I'm hallucinating or this is going to be a very complicated report. The queen's eyes opened. She did not look surprised. You are awake, she said calmly. I am, he replied, still processing. Neither of them moved. The officer decided very carefully not to move first. Just to confirm, he said slowly, this is not a standard medical procedure. No, good, because I was about to file a complaint. She studied him for a moment, her gaze steady and unreadable. You survived the strike. That was the plan, he said. I prefer surviving. The weapon was not designed for your biology. That explains the part where it felt like reality stopped cooperating. She did not respond to that. Instead, she shifted slightly closer. The officer froze. All right, he said quietly. We're getting closer now. Behind the wall to his right, he suddenly heard something. Voices, whispering, panicking. She's still there. Don't enter the chamber. This violates. The officer glanced toward the wall. Are those my people panicking or your people panicking? Yes, the queen replied. Fair answer. He carefully tried to sit up. That was a mistake. His entire body protested immediately. Okay, he muttered. Standing is cancelled. The queen placed a hand lightly against his shoulder. Do not move. I wasn't planning to win any races. He settled back again, trying to ignore the fact that he was currently lying next to one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, in what could generously be described as a very informal arrangement. So, he said after a moment, quick question. She waited. Why are you here? You prevented my death. That usually earns a thank you, not this. She tilted her head slightly. This is not gratitude. That's concerning. It is instinct. The officer blinked. That is more concerning. Her filaments shifted again, settling more securely across his arm. He stared at them. Is this part of the instinct? Yes. Good to know. Behind the wall, the whispering grew louder. Ancient protocol. This cannot be allowed. If the bond is real, the officer frowned. Did they just say bond? The queen's gaze did not change. Yes. He looked at her. Then at the wall, then back at her again. I feel like I missed an important meeting. You were unconscious. That explains it. He took a slow breath. All right, he said carefully, new question. She remained silent. What exactly happened when I got hit by that thing? For the first time since he woke up, there was a pause, not hesitation, consideration. Then she answered. It recognized you. The officer stared at her. That sounds like something I should be worried about. You should. He sighed. Of course I should. Outside the room, the whispers turned into arguments. Inside the room, the officer realized something important. The pain, the attack, the strange weapon, none of it was the biggest problem anymore. The biggest problem was the fact that the queen of an alien empire was currently curled beside him, and no one on either side of the wall seemed to know what to do about it. The officer listened to the arguing outside the chamber for a few seconds, then looked back at the queen. They sound stressed, he said. They are, she replied. That makes two of us. He shifted slightly, then immediately regretted it. Still injured, he added. Yes. Still confused. Yes. He nodded. At least we're consistent. The whispers beyond the wall grew louder. This violates core protocol. Remove him immediately. You cannot separate them now, the officer froze. Did they just say cannot separate? The queen's gaze remained steady. Yes. That feels like an important limitation. It is. He looked at her carefully. All right, he said slowly. I'm going to ask a very direct question. She waited. Why can't they move you away from me? There was a pause, not hesitation, precision, because the bond has already formed. The officer stared at her. I'm starting to think I should not have stepped in front of that weapon. You prevented my death. Yes, but I may have complicated my schedule. Behind the wall, the door controls flickered briefly, then locked again. Someone tried to override them. It failed. The officer raised an eyebrow. That seems intentional. It is. You locked them out. Yes. That's either very reassuring or extremely alarming. The queen shifted slightly closer again, her filaments adjusting as if responding to something he could not feel. The officer looked down at his arm. They keep doing that. They are stabilizing. Stabilizing what? You. He blinked. I thought I was already stable. You were not. That's not comforting. The voices outside suddenly became clearer as one of the advisors raised their voice. If this is a true bond, separation could cause neural collapse. The records are clear. No precedent exists for reversing it. The officer slowly turned his head toward the wall. Neural collapse sounds bad. Yes. I'm guessing that applies to you. Yes. And possibly me. Yes. He took a slow breath. All right. That narrows down our options to stay here or catastrophic biological failure. She did not respond. He nodded. Good, simple choices. Silence settled in the room again, but it felt different now. Less chaotic, more focused. The officer looked at her again. You said the weapon recognized me. Yes. Recognized what exactly? Another pause, then compatibility. He blinked. That sounds like a word people use before things get complicated. It already is. Fair point. He ran a hand slowly across his face. So let me try to understand this. She remained still. That weapon wasn't trying to kill you. No, it was trying to test something. Yes. And when I stepped in, it tested me instead. Yes. And now we're biologically linked. Yes. He leaned back slightly. That feels like a very aggressive interview process. For the first time, the Queen's expression shifted just enough to suggest something close to amusement. The officer noticed. Oh good, he said. There are still normal reactions happening. She studied him carefully. You are adapting quickly. I've had practice. With what? Unexpected problems. She nodded slightly. That is evident. Outside the chamber, the arguing suddenly stopped. A new voice replaced it, calm, authoritative. You prepare the council. We proceed according to ancient law. The bond is acknowledged, the officer sighed. That sounds official. It is. He looked at her again. So what happens now? She answered without hesitation. Now the Empire must accept what has already happened. And what exactly has already happened? Her luminous eyes held his. You are no longer separate from me. The officer stared at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly. Well, he said, that's going to require a very detailed report. The chamber doors finally opened, not with force, not with panic, with authority. The arguing outside stopped immediately as the council entered in careful formation. Advisors, generals, and historians stepped into the room with the kind of silence that suggested everyone had already reached a conclusion, and no one was entirely comfortable with it. The officer glanced toward the doorway. Well, he said quietly, this feels official. It is, the Queen replied. He made no attempt to move away from her, not because he couldn't, although that was still partially true, but because he had begun to understand something during the past few minutes. Running from the situation was no longer an option. He looked at the approaching council members. Do I need to stand up for this? No. Good. The leading advisor stepped forward, keeping a respectful distance. Your Majesty, they said carefully, the council has reviewed the ancient protocols, and the bond is confirmed. The officer nodded slightly. I had a feeling that was going to be the conclusion. The advisor hesitated before continuing. According to imperial law, once a life-bonded guardian is recognized, separation is forbidden. The officer raised a hand slightly. Yes, we've discussed the part where separating us causes very dramatic biological consequences. The advisor gave him a brief, uncertain look. That is correct. Another council member spoke. The throne's stability must be considered. The officer glanced at them. That sounds like the beginning of a complicated sentence. It is. The Queen's voice cut through the room calmly. The throne remained stable. Silence followed. Not forced, accepted. The officer noticed something then. No one challenged her, not directly, which meant the debate was already over. They just hadn't admitted it out loud yet. He looked back at the Queen. You already knew what they would decide. Yes, that's efficient. It was inevitable. The officer took a slow breath. A few hours ago, his world had been simple. Stand guard, follow orders, try not to get vaporized. Now he was lying in the center of a political storm that could reshape an entire empire. And strangely, he wasn't panicking anymore. He looked at the council. All right, he said calmly, let's address the obvious. They all turned toward him. I'm not from your empire. No, the advisor said. I wasn't trained for any of this. That is also clear. And I definitely didn't volunteer for a permanent biological bond with royalty. A brief pause, that is understood. He nodded, good, then he continued. But I stepped in front of that weapon. The room went quiet again, and whatever it was designed to do, it worked. No one disagreed. He glanced at the Queen. You said it recognized me. Yes. And that means this wasn't random. No, he looked back at the council. So instead of arguing about whether this should have happened, maybe we should figure out why it did. The silence shifted. Not tension, focus. One of the historians spoke carefully. The weapon was designed to reveal compatibility with the Queen's biological systems. The officer nodded. So it was looking for someone like me. Yes. And it found one. Yes. He exhaled slowly. Well, he said, that feels less like an accident and more like very aggressive matchmaking. A few of the advisors looked confused. The Queen's expression shifted slightly again, just enough to suggest she understood the humor. The officer noticed. That's good, he added. At least one of us is keeping up. The tension in the room finally eased, not completely, but enough. The crisis had been acknowledged. The rules had been accepted. Now came the part no one had prepared for. Moving forward, the officer looked at the Queen again. So, he said, what happens next? She answered without hesitation. We adapt. He considered that simple plan. It must be. He nodded. For the first time since waking up, he allowed himself to relax slightly. Not because the situation was resolved, but because he understood his place in it now. Not a soldier standing at the edge of the throne room. Not an outsider observing from a distance, but someone standing, very literally, at the center of something much larger than himself. He glanced toward the doorway, then